Welcome to the Creative Community Podcast presented by Destination Arate. I'm David.
And I'm Mark. And we are building a community of people who work together to find creative solutions to tell inspirational stories.
And today we have an interview for you, an interview with Chad Frye. Chad Frye calls himself the illustration guy. Chad Frye, illustration guy, kind of rhymes. I love it. But we really talked to him more about animation, his experience in the animation industry, and what was something that stood out to you from this conversation with Chad?
Honestly, so much. There's so much that Chad gives us in this episode that's just really fun. We got to talk to him a little bit about his teaching experience, specifically him teaching at Disney. So he lists a few of the people that he had the opportunity to teach while he was at Disney, and it blew me away. That was the part of the conversation where my jaw just dropped. I couldn't believe it. So, and he was very generous with how much he shared in that part of the conversation. So what stood out to you?
Honestly, the story at the end about his mentor, late in the interview where we ask him about his mentor, Al. And you'll want to listen to that part just because it's neat to see, number one, how the Lord brings people into your life, but then number two, just like Chad's humility and being able to credit Al with the opportunities that he was able to get through that connection, and then also the things he was able to learn as a boy from him, and just the investment there. So I think that is something that has stood out to me a lot over the last 2 years of talking to professionals, is the relationships that they have. And of course, that's who I am. I'm the relationship guy, David Burrell, relationship guy, instead of Chad Frye, illustration guy.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's what stood out to me. I can't wait for people to hear what Chad has to say.
Same. So, without further ado, let's get you guys into that interview.
Sure. Well, I like to call myself Chad Frye, illustration guy. It was just something I started doing years ago. So yes, I do a lot of illustration, but I also work heavily in the animation industry. Probably the one thing the last big thing that I worked on that hasn't come out yet, but we're all waiting. I get asked almost every day on Instagram, when is season 2 of Green Eggs and Ham coming out on Netflix? So I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not. I finished my part of it 2 years ago, so it takes a while for everybody else to do what they do to make a show like that. So, but yeah, that's probably the last big major thing that I worked on, and even my nephews are champing at the bit to see that. So eventually.
That's awesome. So did you work, I hear a lot of people say they work with Netflix, via Instagram and stuff, they'll always announce. What is that process like? Did you freelance for them? Did you go, is there a physical location or?
No, it was really cool, actually. We started, well, I was on season 2 and they had already done most of season 1 when I joined them. But this was before Netflix had their own animation studio. So that kind of happened while we were working on season 2. So I was working for Warner Brothers Animation, who was creating the show for Netflix. I was a storyboard revisionist on the season. So I wasn't part of meetings with Netflix, but the show was produced by Ellen DeGeneres and her company. And I know her people were always coming over for meetings, and then they would have meetings with Netflix. They would have meetings with Warner Brothers Brass. So there were a lot of meetings. So I just sat in my little corner and did what I needed to do. And it was such a thrill to work on it, though, because Green Eggs and Ham was my favorite Dr. Seuss book as a kid. So to help turn it into a show was really fun. And the fact that it was hand animated too, it was not a CG show. That was a thrill. I got to work with a lot. We didn't say this yet, but I used to work at Disney, and there were a lot of ex-Disney people working on it. So it was kind of a reunion. There must have been about 7 or 8 of us there on that season. So it was a lot of fun.
So what is that like? You have an art agent, or the art director just called you up and sent you an email or something? Or
no, that's the tricky thing about animation. Some people have agents, but I'm not sure what the agents do for them other than taking a percentage of their salaries. Because in animation, it's really all about personal connections. So yeah, you have to have the ability to do the job as well, but because these things cost so much money, and they're on these tight schedules, and they're hesitant to reach out to get someone who's unknown. That being said, I was unknown to the producer on this show. And it was just because I sent her a Christmas card and I said, hey, they had interviewed me for season 1 and did not hire me. And what, I kept in touch and I sent her a Christmas card, and then I get an email going, hey, are you available? We're staffing up for season 2. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. So
Nice.
we got to work in-house. It wasn't freelance because this was before the pandemic. This was, I worked on it from 2018 to 19, about middle of the year. And so I had a whole year on it. And we worked out of what's now called the Burbank Studios, but it's the former NBC studios right here in Burbank, California. And every day I walked past the sound stages that used to be Johnny Carson's Tonight Show and Jay Leno's Tonight Show. I'd have to walk past those to get to where my office was. So it was kind of a thrill to kind of be in this place where there was a lot of history. I love old Hollywood stuff like Jack Benny and stuff. And all these people had shot shows right there. It was amazing. So it was a real working live action studio. And we just happened to have a suite of offices where we were working on our show. So.
Man,
You never knew who you'd see from day to day.
Yeah, I'm sure. I was talking to somebody about Jack Benny the other day, how he would go down and unlock the vault for the 2 cents of change or whatever.
Yeah.
Just like, you don't find stuff like that anymore. It's, it's really hard to reproduce that. So that's pretty cool. Well,
yeah. Technically, I didn't see him while I was there. So
yeah. Just that is a throwback, is that Jack Benny stuff. So
yeah.
For those of our listeners born after 1985.
I grew up listening to old tapes while we were on road trips as a family, old radio shows, and that's when I first fell in love with Jack Benny stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, we had a compilation tape, Jack Benny, and that lady that talks on the phone to her neighbor about her husband and her dog, and all those people, just good times. So, well, you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, how you said, you're an illustrator. That's how you introduce yourself, but then you're also an animator. And, if you go on your website, you do characters, you do comic strips, you do illustrations. So we've been studying this throughout the past 2 years and with our guests about how a lot of times we find someone broke through and had success in one area, and then we're able to branch out. Did you find that you did that? You had this one thing that got you successful, and then you were able to start to branch into other things, or how did that go for you?
Well, I would say in one regard, I feel like I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades. Not that I can draw everything, because I can't. I'm definitely more of a cartoony guy in my style. Yeah, I mean, I would always learn in school about how you need to focus on one area, and you need to get really good in doing this one thing, and people get to know you for that. I don't know. I never had that experience. Maybe I was never good enough in one area, but I've always just kind of, if a job came along and someone said, hey, can you do that? And I'd be honest and say, well, I haven't done that before, but yeah, I can do that. I know I can do that. Then I'll just pick it up and run with it. So it's always kind of been like that for me, even in animation, because right now, while I started, my first job in animation in Hollywood was working for Disney Feature Animation. And I had been illustrating children's books on the East Coast primarily, and doing illustration work. And someone out here at Disney knew me and said, well, why don't you come out and interview? We'd like to see if you'd be a good fit here. And my job there was to teach. It was kind of at the beginning of the computer revolution, and they wanted me to join their training staff as an artist to help bridge the gap for the artists that were there. So, I mean, this was back when Photoshop was on version 1, this is when the CAPS system, which they invented at Disney, they had just, actually the guy who hired me had just finished writing the manual for that. So for 6 years, I started on the movie Mulan. And for 6 years, I worked there, involved with the different productions, training people how to use the computer. And so it was kind of a weird way in, going from children's books to that.
Yeah.
And then once I left there and I got involved in production, because I did not work on production at Disney Feature Animation, but I did for TV animation at Disney. So I just kept taking these jobs that that people say, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? So I've done props, I've done character design, I've done storyboard revisions, whatever comes up that if I feel it's within what I can do, I say yes. And then it's just my way of continuing to work. So it's always about wanting to work because you're hired for a project. If you're on production and animation, you're hired for a project. And when that's done, you're let go. And usually when you're hired, they tell you when your end date is. They have these schedules figured all the way out to that. There's some leeway, but not usually. It's usually pretty close to what they tell you when they hire you. So it's just a way to continue to be employed, So I've never focused in on one area in particular, but I think everything I've done it's always been a part of my skill set. So I don't know if that kind of answers it or not.
Yeah, I feel like it does. And that's super helpful. There was one thing you said in there that I kind of wanted to go back and double click on, because you mentioned that even if you hadn't done something, you kind of looked at it and said, yeah, I've never done it before, but I can do that. What gave you the confidence to be able to say that, like to be able to do that?
Well, in the things that I have done, whether it's prop design or character design or storyboarding, it's all using aspects of illustration, quite frankly. When I do drawings and illustrations for books or magazines or whatever I've done, I'm creating props. Props are what in animation, prop means whatever the character's holding, by the way. So whatever they're interacting with that moves. So if I need to make a little robot, great. If I need to give a guy a spatula, then great. I've already done that in drawings. So how hard is it to do it for animation? Character design too. When you're doing books, you're always drawing characters from all different angles. So that's what you got to do in animation character design. You got to create turns.
I was going to say, and is that just because you figured out super early how to rotate primitives on paper, or?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's not that anything comes super easy necessarily, but just like someone who's learning to play piano, the more you practice, the better you get at it, and you kind of know where your abilities are. So,
okay.
So yeah, I'm not going to be the guy painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling, but you ask me to figure out how to draw Mickey Mouse from 4 different angles. I think I can do that. That's not a problem. It's just constantly working at it though. I keep sketchbooks, which a lot of artists will tell you that, I'm sure. So
yeah,
right. Always sketching, always thinking, always analyzing. I don't just go out to the mall and just see faceless people. I'm actually looking at everything. I'm observing everything. I've started recognizing faces from one location to another. I'll see somebody at a mall this week. The next week I'll see them at like Best Buy, and I'll recognize them because I was paying attention to who was around me.
Yeah, you've got that. Cool. You're building that visual library always. You're always. Yeah.
Yeah.
Had you already illustrated for Disney books by the time you got out there, or was it because you worked out there that you? Oh, okay, so on the East Coast you illustrated.
Yeah, you guys, I know you. I haven't seen it yet, which I told you your interview with the Thompson brothers, Del and Dana, but I actually interned with them when I was in college, and then for the 3 years that I stuck around in town, for most of the 3 years. They rented a corner of their studio to me, and we all kind of worked together. So I did work on some Disney books with them.
Okay.
They were the principals on them, and I was an extra hand helping out. I think we did a Minnie Mouse book. We did. I was there when I was watching them work on Pocahontas books when that movie was being made, and Hunchback too. They did those. I did not. But then I worked on a Hercules book. In fact, when I started at Disney, it was the weekend of the crew party for the wrap of Hercules. And I was like, I couldn't go because I didn't work on the movie. I was like, I did this book. Didn't matter.
Man, I bet working with them was just, how did you stand just being in the same studio with Del and Dana?
They influenced me a lot.
Yeah.
And they taught me a lot of things that I did not learn in school because it was just day in and day out, with illustration with them. So it was great.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. And we're still friends to this day. So that never left us. I guess we've known each other, let's say about 30 years. So
Cool.
You mentioned our second question was like about how specifically you got your job at Disney, and you did mention that you were hired there to train other people on how to use the computer. And
right.
I'm interested in the connection between you're a children's book illustrator and all of a sudden you're teaching Disney people how to use computers. I'm really interested to hear that story. So I don't know if you can go into that.
Yeah, I can go into it a little bit. Yeah, I didn't use the computer a whole lot before going there, quite frankly. It was still such a new thing. If I was part of the generation that was learning, when I went to art school, we were learning everything traditionally. We learned how to cut zipatone. We learned, ambolith. We were using photostat machines and things like that. And then by the time I graduated, the computer had started taking over. And so I go out into the workforce and you could still do things traditionally, but that computer was starting to change everything. Like I said, Photoshop was only on version 1, and Dell and Dana had just gotten, I think they had a Macintosh computer early on, but they had just gotten Photoshop, and we were all just taking turns trying to play with it and figure out how it could be very useful. It wasn't very in that first version, quite frankly. We saw that comic books were starting to be colored with it, and we saw an article about how they were doing that. So we were trying to do the steps and figure it out. But Photoshop, you could only do one undo, and you were limited into how many layers you could have. I'm trying to remember how many layers. When I was at Disney teaching the artists, Photoshop was up to 50 layers at that point, but it wasn't that many when we were starting to play with it. So it was very clunky, and it wasn't quite there for day-to-day use, not for what we were doing. I played with it a little bit, and then when they hired me, they hired me because I did have a bit of a knowledge about animation. I had worked at a small studio in South Carolina as an animator before I was full-time into illustration. And I always had a love for that. And then with all the art background, they thought I might be a good fit. So they taught me on the job at Disney. And they would have to, because most of the software I was teaching was invented in-house. It wasn't anything anybody else could have.
Wow.
So other than Photoshop, and then eventually what was called Fractal Painter, and then it changed hands a few times and changed names, but those were a couple of off-the-shelf programs that the visual development artists were using. But yeah, it was mostly in-house software at first. It took a while to get ramped up. The big program that they called CAPS was very intensive. It was most people on the outside, myself included, thought it was just an ink and paint program, but it was an entire production software. The whole movie went through it. So I know everybody likes to say Star Wars Episode 1 was the first digital movie. No, that's not true. I think it was Rescuers Down Under, because everything had to go through this CAP system. And it was the whole movie went through digital. And in those days, in order to get it to film, because there was no digital projection at that point, they literally put a cone on the front of a monitor with an old Oxford camera shooting red, green, blue passes on every frame. That's how they could get it from the computer onto film. So Rescuers Down Under, which would have been 1990, I think.
Yep.
Is when that came out.
Thanksgiving of 1990.
Yeah.
Which is weird because it didn't do well in the US, but you have to remember Thanksgiving of 1990 in the US is the beginning of summer in Australia, which is why they released it then. But that opening scene when they fly through the bush towards that rock is forever my favorite.
It's fun to hear the guys talk about that, because that was one of the last scenes they did, because they couldn't get the software to do that when they were starting on the film, so they kept advancing it until they could get that done, and that came towards the end of production. Yeah.
Holy cow.
Well, that is insane. Like, procrastinating on an assignment to wait for the technology to catch up to your idea is like
Yeah,
That's so cool. Oh man, so cool.
Well, and then it just kept getting better and better. They kept inventing, and I love that deep canvas program they used on Tarzan, where the background painters were painting jungle, but it was CG geometry of jungle, but the background painters had this special thing where they could literally do digital painting on the geometry. And then they would rotate it a little bit and paint some more. And the computer, it took forever to render because the computer would render every single frame, every stroke that they were painting. So it took a long time to render, but what a great look that was.
Yeah.
And they used it again in Treasure Planet on the ship.
Right, because I remember seeing the scenes of the Glen Keane Tarzan animation moving through the jungle with the deep canvas painting, and watching, like, there's a behind the scenes somewhere of them like showing you the layers of that and showing it's just absolutely beautiful to watch it all come together. And then just all that mixed with Glen's great, fantastic drawings. You're just like, this is what it's about,
It was neat. It was fun to be there for all of that. Yeah.
So were you training people on deep canvas and caps and all that? Like,
Yeah. I don't
like who were you, like, tell us who you trained. Like, I want to know who you. This is nuts.
Well, I didn't train anybody in deep canvas for Tarzan, but I did for Treasure Planet. And at the time we had 3 studios. We had one in Florida, one in France, and the one in California. And they sent a bunch of French background painters to me to learn deep canvas for Treasure Planet. So I had classes with those guys for that. And it was a tough thing to try to learn that program just to be able to teach it too.
And then to be able to teach it to someone who speaks French.
Yeah, but they knew English.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, good.
Yeah,
good.
no.
I'm glad. I was just like, you're just adding. This is just getting more and more hard.
They were. Sometimes it was hard to understand through the accents, but yeah, no, they could speak English.
Okay, good.
Which was good because I don't speak French. It's never come up before. But I did give Glenn classes in Photoshop. Photoshop was a big one. The Photoshop is the one that I taught a lot of people, like Chris Sanders. I gave classes to for Photoshop. Glenn, and then Glenn had me showing. I think it was Andy Gaskill who was I think he started doing art direction type stuff for Tangled back when we were still calling it Rapunzel. But boy, I mean, you look at a list of credits from that era, from the late 90s, early 2000s, and I probably worked with almost everybody at some point. I worked with most of the animators because we had a digital pencil test system where they could shoot their own artwork, and that had just come along when I got there, and so I was teaching all the animators how to shoot their own pencil tests. So you bring up their name, and I probably sat down with them and gave them a class. It was pretty cool.
When you meet a veteran and you thank them for their service, that's how I feel about you right now, where I want to shake your hand and thank you for your service. Like, wow, because all those things have influenced me so much. And so like you said before we started the interview, you've been behind the scenes for a lot of things, but I mean it in all sincerity. Thank you for your service. Like, that's incredible what you've done.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff that we do, I mean, most people don't know who we are, and in those early days too, they didn't give everybody screen credit. So I didn't get screen credit for a lot of movies I worked on. Mm-hmm. I think my first big screen credit was in Emperor's New Groove, but I worked on Mulan and Tarzan and what came before Emperor's New Groove. A little bit on Dinosaur, but not enough to even get credit on that one. But yeah, so it was just one of those things where we kind of now even the guy who runs the coffee counter, he gets credit. His credit is caffeination.
Yeah.
It's the same guy that was there when I was there, so he still works there.
That's great.
Oh my goodness, the stories he could tell.
Yeah, seriously. I left in 2003 when his coffee was just a cart that was outside the front door, and now they built him a nice counter and everything inside.
That's funny.
So,
Mark,
yeah.
is now a good time to tell Chad your thesis on Treasure Planet?
The
Oh,
what now?
what are you talking about? The song?
No, about how you feel about the expectations that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I watched a YouTube video and they were talking about Treasure Planet and how Treasure Planet ruined animated movies and childhoods, because every kid who grew up in the 90s watched Treasure Planet and thought this is what it is to make art. It's space pirates, you know. So for the next, like, it's literally the cliche, like every kid in their portfolio has space ninja robot pirates, you know, and no one makes space ninja robot pirate content, you know, like no one makes that anymore. And so they talked about how Treasure Planet was the movie that should have never been made, because it's literally just everyone at Disney just nerding out about all of the cool stuff that they love. It's got robots and pirates and space and whales, and you know, it's just everything everyone thought was cool thrown into a movie. So, but
Yeah.
anyway, it says like it was an artist saying, "Hey, don't blame us. Treasure Planet ruined us," you know.
I got to tell you, I was really happy to work on that one, because my big love for wanting to even get into animation, because when I was a teenager, animation wasn't, it was flailing. I mean, I was, you know, that was the era of Black Cauldron and stuff, and people weren't really going to the movies. And then Little Mermaid came along, and I was like, what is this? It was unlike anything I had seen before in animation. I saw a presentation done at a college before it came out, back in New Jersey, where I grew up. And my jaw was on the floor with the songs and just the animation, everything. And that was directed by John Musker and Ron Clements. And Treasure Planet was directed by John Musker and Ron Clements. And I was thrilled to be able to work on that, because what those guys, what they led with Little Mermaid is what got me interested in wanting to even be a part of the business. So it was kind of cool to get to work on something they were directing. So, but Treasure Planet, and I love the book Treasure Island. So it was kind of that was one of those heavy books when I was a little kid that I really got into. So it was kind of fun to be a part of that.
I think now's a good time to ask you if you have a project from your career that brought you the most joy, either while you were working on it or when you were done looking back at it. And you can give us your top 3. You can give us, you know, it doesn't have to be just this is the only one I loved, you know, because I'm sure there've been many.
Yeah, I think for me, the ones that become favorites are ones that were firsts, because I never had the experience before. So when something was finished and then it came out, there was a certain, I don't mean proud as in bragging or anything, but it gave you the sense of pride that, wow, look at that, it came out and it's done. And so that being the case, I would say my very first book was probably my favorite project. Not that I look back on it now and I'm like, hopefully other people recognize too that I can draw better now than I did all those years ago, but I don't think I got more pleasure out of anything since the first book, which was called the Fun Bible Search Book. The Fun Bible Search Book, Find Rupert. So I did that when I was still a student at Bob Jones. So I think I started working on it when I was a sophomore. And then it came out, but it was from a real publisher, and it was in bookstores all over the country. And, but it made my parents proud, who I think had been a little nervous about their son wanting to be an artist, because I'd go into a bookstore with them and my dad would go and find the book and he'd turn it face out so everybody could see it. It was just never anything that I've done before or since that gave me that kind of satisfaction. So now it's always a challenge to get the next project so that you can keep doing that kind of stuff. But that would probably be my first. And then, with animation, the first big project I worked on was Mulan. So boy, what a good movie for a first timer. I'm so old now that they just remade it, right? In live action. So that's messed up. I won't watch it. I can't bring myself to watch it. It's like, we did it right the first time. So there was a lot of satisfaction in that too.
This is just a selfish question, David, and you don't have to put it in the interview, but did you work with Armand Serrano on Mulan at all?
It's funny. I didn't meet Armand until later.
Okay.
So I didn't know him at the time. And we also both worked on Animal Crackers. It's on Netflix.
Oh yeah.
He was production designer, I think, and I was doing storyboard revision work on that. And we never actually met until we were both done with that project. So sometimes you don't even meet the other people who are working on the project that you're on. So
Well,
he was on another floor than I was at Disney anyway.
Yeah, I was gonna ask because Mulan was his first like Burbank feature film too.
Okay.
He worked at Hanna-Barbera Studios in the Philippines, and someone said, "You're really good. You should move to Burbank." And so he did, and he when we asked him what his favorite project was, he said it was Mulan because it was his first. It was his first, like, I made it,
Yeah.
film. So
he's really good too. Holy cow, he's good.
Yeah, he's good. Real good.
Yeah.
It's just like VR sculpting the Valley of Elah, on Instagram. And I'm like, okay, all right. No need to flex on us like that, Armand.
Yeah, it's funny.
I'm glad we finally met you, because the Thompsons, and John Pomeroy, Armand, and so who knows who else apparently everybody. So
I keep my world keeps colliding with John's, especially because obviously we were both at Disney at the same time. And I got to tell you, I remember one day I was walking by when he was working on Atlantis, and he did some storyboards for it with Milo. Those were so cool. It's so much acting right in his storyboards. It was like he was doing his key poses in boards. But he and I were both storyboarding on Alvin and the Chipmunks at the same time. Didn't know it because we're both doing it from home.
Mhm.
And I did revisions on his storyboards for Animal Crackers. So it's like we keep getting on the same projects.
Nice. I think you've already answered this question because we wanted to ask you what special thanks meant for Home Alone or Home on the Range, Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, Treasure Planet. Those 4 films, just Mark and I have seen those so many times. And like Home on the Range has a very special place in our families, just like media history. Like we all quote it to one another because we would just watch it as kids. But is that what special thanks means? Like you did something, like you taught somebody Photoshop, or what does that mean to get special thanks?
The special thanks credit was what they gave to people who were considered support staff. So some of the support staff meaning people who did stuff behind the scenes that wasn't affecting all the movies. So there was a group of us, whether technology people or what I did, that we worked on all the movies, and we didn't really have our own category necessarily. So they kind of, when they finally decided to give everybody screen credit, that's what they came up with, was special thanks. So we were involved from beginning to end on those things, but it wasn't until, like I said, Emperor's New Groove, that they decided to start giving us credit. So yeah, it was good because that way it proved to my family and friends that I actually worked there. It was like, sure, I didn't see your name in the credits, Chad. You didn't really work on that movie. Well, then it started happening.
That's cool.
Of course, then your name is so small, grandma can't read it, but what can you do?
Hey, it's there.
It's there. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, Chad, thank you so much. We'll have to have you back on and have a conversation about your art, because I thank you so very much for letting us talk to you about kind of this phase of your career where you worked at Disney in this behind the scenes role. It's been so encouraging to me, and I know it's going to be encouraging to our listeners. So, but seriously, we want to have you back on to talk about the stuff you actually drew. I'm so sorry. So
no, that's all right. Well, it's been a long, vast career, I guess. So,
well, to give a little teaser for that next conversation, can we ask you one more question?
Yeah.
Can you talk about Al Hartley at all, and what he taught you and what you learned from him, maybe a little bit?
So, if people out there don't know who Al was a comic book artist who he actually worked on Marvel stuff. I think he had done some Hulk and things like that. And then he got involved with Archie comics and was drawing them all the time. And as an adult, he accepted Christ as a savior. And somehow I don't know if I ever actually asked him, but somehow he was able to license the use of Archie. And he's the guy who made the Christian Archie comics that people saw. And of course, if you followed Spire Christian Comics back in the 70s and 80s, and I don't know I think maybe they changed names, but it was still the same company. He also did comic book adaptations of Christian novels and biographies and things like that. And boy, his work was very influential on me as a kid. And came to find out, he went to my grandmother's church in Florida, in Fort Myers. And so whenever I'd go visit my grandmother, guess who I was going to visit too? And he showed me such grace and compassion as a little kid, coming into his home. I remember I interviewed him, I think when I was 9 or 10 years old for some school project. And he sat there very patiently and answered my childlike questions. And it just was a relationship that started so long ago like that. And he just kind of kept patting me on the shoulder and encouraging me to do what I was doing. And because I don't think I really drew any better than any other kid at that age. But I had the desire, and I think he saw that and was always trying to foster that in me. So just a tremendous sweet guy who was helping me out as a little kid like that. And then when I was a teenager, my parents went down to Florida to visit my grandmother, and Al saw them at church, and he said, "Oh, how's Chad doing?" And my dad said that I was going to college now for art. And he goes, "Oh, have him send me some of his stuff." And I sent some of my work to him, and that's how I got that first book that I told you about, the Rupert book. It was through Al's publisher, and Al told his publisher, he says, "You need to get this kid to do that book." And it was something that I think they had wanted him to do, but it was a Christian take on the Where's Waldo, and I don't think Al had the patience to do all those tiny little drawings. But I was a hungry kid. I was ready to do it, and because of him, that's how I got my first professional job. So just the sweetest guy, really. And his mother-in-law was one of my grandmother's best friends. So it was just kind of a fun connection that happened that way. Who would have thought? God works in mysterious ways, and I lived in New Jersey, he lived in Florida, and God put us together, and it ended up being a huge influence in me, personally and professionally. So yeah, a great guy.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
The little bit of research I was able to do, I think I've read both the Cross and the Switchblade comic that he did and the Corey Ten Boom comic. And
Oh, both of those are great.
I think they
Yes.
were in our school library or something. And
Yeah.
I didn't realize who.
I still have my copies in the closet over here.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
We had the Corey Ten Boom one. Like, I know exactly where it sat on the shelf in our home. Like it was a part of us. So
Yeah.
Wow.
He did write a book about his conversion. It was a small paperback, but there's a book out there that he wrote, and I think he may have done some illustrations for it too. So that's about the only thing I'd ever seen that talked about where he talked about his life and career. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for telling us that story. That was awesome.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. A lot of fun.
All right. Well, Mark, anything else? I'm sure you have 1,000 other things, but
I know. I just wanted to ask Chad if he could let people know kind of where they can follow you if they want, if they want to look you up on social media or anything like that. If you want to list any sort of thing like that, we'd love to give that opportunity. Or if you have anything you'd like to promote, if you want to talk about anything that's coming out. So.
Lately, I've been working on illustrating an 8th grade math textbook. So that's not something most people are going to rush out and buy unless they're forced to for school. But I have an Instagram page, Chad Frye Illustration Guy, and then on Facebook I have a public Facebook page that's Chad Frye _ Illustration Guy. I couldn't quite get the words together, so there's an underscore in the middle of the Facebook one. But yeah, that's where people can follow me, and I'm always posting drawings on both those spots. So yeah.
Yeah, just finished up Monster Month.
Yes, yeah. Whew. A different monster every day in October. That was a challenge, and I spent a lot of time leading up to that to get them done.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, if you ever do a monthly or a 90-day, you got to draw ahead, because otherwise, yeah,
There's
you'll
always
be
something
so
that comes
behind.
up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
As always, thank you so much to Chad. It was just an amazing interview. Like we said, we will have him back on to talk about his art at some point. A lot of the great work that he's done over the course of his career, both recently and in the past. It's really cool. It was really cool to hear about his time with our good friends Dylan and Dana Thompson. We'll have to dig. It would be cool to get those three guys in a room together and have like a story session from when they all worked for the advertising agencies in New York. That would just be so cool. I can't imagine how many ads I saw growing up, or cereal boxes or stuff that they worked on. So, but thanks you so much to Chad again. And if you want to follow him, you can follow him at Chad Frye Illustration Guy. And then his website is Chad Frye Illustration Guy. There's some awesome work on there that you can go look at.
yeah, and if you're listening to this episode on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, Google, all the platforms, YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. We've got tons of content coming your way every 2 weeks here in 2022. So be sure to subscribe to us there, and we would really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, Destination Arete, ARETE, and that will give you certain information. Like we usually post when the episode comes out, and then about a week later we'll post a quote just to let you guys know kind of what you missed if you haven't listened to it yet. So just a little reminder there. And then also on Facebook we do interactions, things like that. We go live on Instagram, and we also put up polls, all that kind of stuff. So if you're looking to kind of interact with us on a platform, Instagram and Facebook are great for that. You can join the Facebook group and follow us on Instagram. Again, Destination Arete, ARETE.
And the last thing we have to share is the Destination Arete newsletter. We send that out every other week. And what you're going to get on there is, as we start telling more stories in this year and the coming years, you're going to get to see them first. You're going to get to see them in progress. You're going to see rough sketches. You're going to get to see storyboards. You're going to get to see deleted characters, deleted scenes, all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So destinationarete.com/contact. Send us an email, say I want to be part of the newsletter, or email us directly, destinationarete@gmail.com. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode from the Creative Community Podcast. See you guys then.